I'll take first and
Yeah.
then
Hello? Can everyone hear me? Yes. My name is Norbert, and I have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker for the GeoOnsdag, Luc Girod. Luc came to the Department of Geosciences in 2012 as part of an internship for his master's degree at the engineering school of the French Geographical Society nearby Disneyland. This went well, so that 2 years later, in 2014, he started as a PhD student in the IceMars project, focusing on photogrammetry on glaciers and in permafrost environments. He finished his PhD in 2018, and since then he has been working as a researcher and research engineer in charge of remote sensing observations or remote sensing data processing, the drone infrastructure at our department, and he's also teaching within these topics. Today's talk is about drones, a unique perspective on features of the natural world. Luc, take it away.
I'm taking it away. Thank you. Thank you, Norbert. Yes, so drones have been very popular in our field in the last, actually, decade or so since I've been involved, and more these days. And so we thought it would be a good idea to introduce the public to what we're doing and what can be done and why we would bother. But first, what's a drone? It's a very blurry thing that I have there. We mostly call drone, the proper word would be a UAV, an uncrewed aerial vehicle, which may or may not be very informative. And if you asked me 15 years ago what an UAV was, or what a drone was, I would probably have thought about these guys, the big plane-like military things that the Americans were using in the Middle East. That's not what I'm going to talk about today, and we're not flying them over snow, not that. You might have heard of drones throughout the last decade and more in the news as a nuisance. They are problems in airports, they delay flights, they can be a danger. In some cases, they can delay emergency response. When there's an accident, when there's a flood, when there's any kind of things, people want to take pretty pictures of current events and become a danger to society and to everyone. So that's kind of what I assume the public perspective on drone is. But in the context of this talk, we're talking about drones that potentially look a bit like this. They're relatively light, I say less than 25 kilos, which is a legal limit, but mostly we're working with drones that are somewhere in the 1 to 10 kilos weight and size between a large tablet to something that would barely fit on this table. That's the range. And our drones don't carry bombs, and they don't carry things that would be annoying to people. We mostly have scientific instruments, cameras, laser rangers, thermal cameras, gas analyzers, and, well, some other more custom cases, but really that's what we have. It's scientific instruments that can be carried on relatively small aircrafts. But why do we do that? So there's a whole gap in the data we can observe without them. For instance, if we use weather stations, we will get something that's very punctual. We get data at the location of the weather station. And we'll get temperature, we'll get wind speed, we'll get humidity, we'll get precipitation, some air quality indicators. We'll get a lot of things out of a weather station, but only exactly where it is. Maybe to some degree neighborhood around it, and then if we have a network of them, we can sort of interpolate where it stays, from a measurement perspective, a very punctual thing. And that's a problem when you're working on data that's two-dimensional, three-dimensional. The other source of data for the work we do in geoscience is satellite data. The problem with satellite data is that you're not going to get a very high resolution. The best in the market are going to be somehow sub-meters. What's free is going to be closer to 10 or 15. So that's going to be quite coarse resolution. And if you work on processes that are a bit smaller in scale, you're just not going to be able to measure anything. and the precision is also quite limited. Here's a figure. On the bottom left there, we have satellites that we can't control when they take pictures of. They just go around and they take pictures continuously, and they fly over the same place, depending where you are on the planet, up to every 2 weeks. And if it's cloudy that day, you're not going to get data, and then the next one is 2 weeks later. That's kind of a problem. So yeah, clouds can really interact there. In the red box up top there, we have what we call agile satellites. So those can be pointed a bit to the side of where their orbit is, which helps for the problem of return period. So we could potentially get data on a daily basis, or in some cases, sub-daily basis. Of course, these very fancy, modern, agile things that you need to task to take a picture of an area of interest that just don't acquire all the time everything. That's pay data, that's expensive. It's often very large amounts of data. It's not very easy to work with. And for many cases, it's just too much. The in-between approach between like doing it on the ground and doing it from satellites, of course, is planes. But it's very, very expensive to buy a plane, to operate a plane, even to task a plane from a company that has one to do anything. Every now and then, there's some public data set. In Norway, there's a Norge Bildet archive, which gives you like really nice data, and they fly the whole country every something like 10 years, maybe even less than that in some areas. So that's amazing data. It's very nice. They rarely give you the raw data. You only get what they make out of it, and you have no control on when they do the acquisition. And mostly, it's done in the summer because that's when there's more light. That's when you're going to see the ground better because there's not going to be snow. So for scientific applications, it's quite limited. And if you're going to task an airplane to do anything, you're going to have hundreds of kilometers or thousands of square kilometers of data because it's not worth just sending the plane to do a square kilometer of a field site. My red ellipse there, that kind of fits where the planes would be. Like they are higher resolution. They're like you can get 10 centimeter pixels or even less from a plane. But it has a cost that most research projects cannot stomach. So UAVs, we can get much higher resolution data. So those are 2 pictures taken from drones we use. On the right there, it's a farmstead, and you can see very clearly individual trees, individual branches, all kind of objects, just some tires on the top right there. It's a snowy day, so of course, you don't see the ground, but there's a lot of data that you can see. And on the right there, it's in the Oslo fjord, a bird colony. And you can very clearly identify each bird. If that bird wasn't exactly there, you could see its eggs in the nest. That was actually a research project by a master's student we hosted at the lab, really looking at bird colonies. You couldn't do that through any other means. With drones, you can have whatever temporal frequency you want. You might be interested in seeing how the snow that fell in the night melts through the day. So that's what we have on the right there. A is in the morning, the snow is fresh, and then B is mid of the day, and C is in the evening. And you can see that the shadows have moved, and the snow has fallen from the trees and probably melted on the ground. We also see differently what's in the canopy depending on the time of day. So if we're interested in sub-daily data, there's not really any other option than going ourselves with a drone and just taking data exactly when we want it. Or alternatively, we might be interested in taking data at a very specific time. Like we don't want to take data before an event occurs. We're waiting for something to happen, and then we'll go in the field, take data, because something just happened. A landslide, something that's time critical. And there it's much more flexible. You can just get in your car, put the drone, go to the field site, get the data, and you're out in 2 hours. If you have to get a plane, if you have to get a satellite to be tasked, that can be days. Also, drones are less weather-dependent than satellite acquisition or even plane acquisitions. You can fly when there's clouds, even if the clouds are quite low. As long as your drone is under the cloud cover, you can get good data. Of course, There's advantages, disadvantages of having a very thick cloud cover that creates a darker environment, that creates a very homogeneous light. Sometimes there's some objects that are harder to see if there's no sharp sunlight, but you can always get data, and with some of the equipment we have, it actually doesn't matter if it's dark even. Yeah, so there we can fly. Whereas if, of course, well, if it rains, it's not going to work, but the weather is much more of a problem for remote sensing data. If there's clouds, you just can't see anything, whatever the clouds are. Yes, and also, drones are relatively cheap. I'm saying they're between 50 and 500,000 kroners, which might sound expensive, but when you talk about scientific equipment, that's pennies on the dollar. That's really nothing. If you get any kind of spectral analyzer or something like this in a geology lab, it's going to absolutely bust those numbers. Yes, and so we want to use drones to close this information gap, data that we can't have any other way, temporally or in terms of resolution. So here's a project on seismic data. We see that field work done on the ground allows us to get this very high resolution, small cracks in the rocks that are up to a few meters, and then data obtained from seismic data or from satellite data or from aerial surveys, they give you IDs on faults and seismic events that are in the kilometer to hundreds of kilometers range. And we have this gap there in the 10 to 100 meters, this like small faults, small things that we have in the rocks that we can't really see. And so that was actually a PhD proposal. Let's go with a drone in areas where we have IDs on the other scales and try to merge the gap. So that's a lot of faults from all around the literature, and we see that there's a gap there. Like, there's some points, but like it's clearly a bit gappy, especially at the top there. There's a lack of data, which means if you draw a line there, if you interpolate something, we might miss some kind of breakpoint. We might miss some kind of information and some features that exist but aren't measured because we don't have the equipment. And then you send the drone, and then all these colorful points show up there exactly where we want them to be. So great success. That's a paper that's still in preparation. But yeah, we find those things, and they are where we expected them to be. Good news, bad news from an exciting science perspective, I'm not sure. But at least from the idea that we can use drones to fill that gap, great success. Yes, so why UAVs in geosciences? So the high spatial resolution that I'm saying is great really makes sense because most of the processes, or a lot of the processes we work with, they are in this like 1 to 100 meter scale, like snow distribution, energy in forests, permafrost, the pingos, all kind of things that happen that have a heaving that degrades. They move, some meters, sometimes far less than that, and having a resolution that's more in the 1 to 10 centimeters for repeat surveys really allow us to like see small change and understand much smaller processes. If we don't have that scale of data, we completely miss that information. Having this custom frequency of acquisition really allow us to go in the field when we need it and get the data we want. The weather dependency of drones is good for us because Norway is a very cloudy country, and I'm not even talking about Svalbard. Clouds all the time. Svalbard, it's night half of the year. Being able to go in the field and get data whenever we want, nearly, is really helpful. And of course, relatively low cost. I'll show in one of future slides. There's very cheap drones, the drones that people use for annoying airport officials, these very small things that cost 10,000 kroners or so, and they're very cheap. We try to use those in geosciences, and they do have value, but it's quite limited. But if we can pool our resources, say, okay, we're going to buy good equipment, pool our resources, and then we have equipment that we can then share between research projects much better, and that makes things quite cheap. So that was the whole idea with the drone lab at the University of Oslo. So that's why we built the drone lab. We started with drones. I looked at my data history, and I found that in May 2014, we bought a DJI Phantom 2 Vision Plus. A lot of words to say there was this small thing there that I'm flying on the roof. That was probably illegal. 10 years ago, nobody cares anymore, probably. Yeah, that was the first drone by this company called DJI. They're based in Shenzhen in China. They are everywhere. They are by far the biggest provider of drones in the world. This talk is not sponsored by DJI, but just so you know, you're going to hear that company name quite a few times. About 10% of using drones in geoscience is setting up your drone, going where you want to go, making sure that your flight plan is good, and then 90% is waiting around for the drone to like beautifully automatically do its thing while you complain about weird things that DJI is doing. Yes, so that was the first drone. Then we're like, okay, like that was fun with this small one. That was really an early generation. It was buggy. The camera wasn't very good. Let's buy something good for 2014. And we bought this really big guy that was about, over a meter wide. A bit complicated to use. Came in a very big box. We did very good work with this. Trondheim in the picture there really got a good archive of pictures for that drone, but not very user-friendly. And then, so this, in 2016, the DJI Phantom 3, so it was better than the 2 Vision Plus, came out, and we saw people in the department, volcanology people, people in glaciology, people doing snow, people doing all kind of things. They bought the Phantom 3, and then the Phantom 4, and then this Mavic Pro, which was a smaller one, and there was a bunch of drones around. People were buying drones because, oh, we could do that, it's cheap, whatever. And I don't even know how many of those like second-generation drones we have in the department. None of them are really usable anymore, I assume. But it was getting pricey because, 10 times 10,000 kroners is starting to be the same price as a big drone. And the data you would get out of it is far worse. So we decided, okay, we need better equipment. We need a legal framework because, as I said, in 2014, when I was flying this small drone on the roof of the building, that probably wasn't super legal. And the bigger drones you want to fly, the more complex things you want to do. If you want to publish the data, you might have someone knocking at your door saying, hey, do you have all the licenses to do that? And so having a drone lab, having a formal infrastructure, allow us to have some people that do the paperwork to make sure that people operate in, at least theoretically, the boundaries of the law. Prevent waste, getting better equipment, and also just have a team of experts that not only are there to tell you that you're going to do something that's illegal, but also tell you that, oh, you should use this drone, you should use this kind of camera, you should use this kind of equipment for your task, for what you want to research. So that was very useful. So we went shopping. That's 4 of the drones that we bought. So we had stuff in this category, Mavic, Phantom, DJI products. And then we moved to the right there to things that are more and more expensive, but are much better with their georeferencing. So when you take pictures, when you acquire data, you know exactly where that picture was taken to a few centimeters. The quality of the camera got better. And then instead of just having cameras, we suddenly were able to have different kind of equipment on drones. So thermal cameras, LiDAR, multispectral systems. I'll talk about all of that a bit later. All of this that we just couldn't do with these cheap drones that just have a camera. I mean, the market for small drones is supposed to be photographers, people making videos for YouTube, to some degree videographers. So there's a market for it, but it just really didn't match with the needs we had. So yeah, so we went shopping. Everything except the last columns is from this Chinese company, DJI. Yeah, so let's see some examples of drone-enabled geoscience, I call it. The first technique we use is called photogrammetry. So photogrammetry is just using cameras. So we could do it with consumer drones. The better cameras we could buy by going a bit higher end, they're just better cameras. Like any photographers will tell you, if you buy a very expensive piece of equipment, you're going to get sharper pictures, you're going to get more light, you're going to get more dynamic in your pictures. All of that is good for science. Photogrammetry is just using the concept of stereo vision or multi-stereo vision. We human with our eyes, we have two eyes, and so we can somehow sense depth. If we assume that we can do the same thing with pictures, then we can reconstruct the 3D environments that we photographed. Very basic idea, not necessarily easy in practice, but yeah, just take a bunch of pictures, and if you can recognize objects between two pictures, then you can probably reconstruct it in 3D. That's an example. That's 6 years of flight over Palsameier in Finnmark, in Eidejavri, with that big drone that we bought in 2014. And we can see some level of change. At that level of zoom, not very, very clearly, but there's some degradation. If we look around there, for instance, this thing there is kind of disappearing into the lake little by little, and you can see some spots everywhere. That's the kind of resolution, both temporal and geometrically, that we just can't get any other way. A month ago, I was asked to go take a survey of this solar farm. There's solar farms in Norway. So that's close to Sarpsborg, rather small farm, and we were interested to see what kind of shading there would be from the trees around, really try to see how it was built compared to how it was spec'd to be built. And so we did a whole survey. And so we just flew the big drone with a big camera, and in, I think it was less than 15 minutes in the air, we get this full 3D model. This video doesn't really give it justice. It's a point every 5 millimeters or something. It's unbelievably high resolution. There's data everywhere. It's very, very clean. All the small yellow dots you have there, they're control points on the ground, so we know that the drone was in the right place. We have checks. Yeah, that's photogrammetry. Just take pictures, hope for the best. Oops, next. I don't want to see it again. Yeah. A solar farm is not necessarily a scientific question in itself. The questions come afterward. Sometimes we actually have scientific questions to begin with. And here we wanted to know how snow would distribute over the tundra and the boreal forest in Mongolia. So that's a spot in Mongolia, somewhere in northern Mongolia, close to the Russian border. That's just a picture. If you want to know snow depth, you have to go twice, because you also need to know where the ground is when the snow's not there, which is actually a complicated question, because where's the ground? There's grass, it's a bit mushy. But anyways, if you get data both in the summer and the winter, then you can make snow maps. So that's a snow map. 0 is no snow. Where there's like a lot of red there, it's probably because there's trees or some kind of superstructure that did not reconstruct the same way in the summer and the winter. But you see in blue where snow gets caught. For instance, that would be in a gully. So if you take around there, these blue dots, snow will like collect in areas that are deep, and then there will be basically no snow in open terrain. The wind would just blow it away, unless there's really a lot of snow. But there it's rather dry. But we also saw suddenly that the blue square there and the green square, the snow maps look very different. I'll zoom in a bit there. There on the left is very smooth. We see some tracks, probably either animals walking or humans or vehicles. It could be a car driving by. And you would see this thing in snow maps, of course. There's a bit of a dip. But there, like, we see something that's completely different. And so the question is, okay, what is this? And sheep, just animals grazing, could be horses. There's a lot of more or less wild, more or less herded animals in Mongolia that have this kind of effect on snow. And if you squint and look at the back there on the mountain, you see that there's this kind of very rough texture to the snow, and just because animals just walk there. And suddenly the science question became, oh, what effect have grazing animals on snow distribution? Bit of a change of perspective. Yes, the second tool we bought are LiDAR. So LiDAR, light detection and ranging, is what the acronym really means. It's kind of a pun on radar. And we bought first the L1, the DJI L1, always these guys, which was out when we started the DroneLab, and of course, science happens and technology happened, and so the L2 was released a few years later, and we also upgraded. Those numbers might mean something to you, they might not. What you have to know is it's newer, it's bigger, it's faster, and it's better. Yeah, it's like Daft Punk. The newer one is always better, and you always feel that you're going to miss out if you don't update. Yeah, but so what's LiDAR? LiDAR, the idea is that you have a laser, something that just emits a beam, and you have a receiver that tries to see how long it takes for the beam to be reflected back. So laser gets shots, it travels, it hits something on the way down, and there's a return, or an echo. In some cases, the laser beam might go through the tree and then hit the ground and come back. It might be half caught by a leaf and then still hit the ground, and then you'll get more than one echo coming back, and then you can get a rather interesting point cloud of the whole tree structure. Mostly we're interested in LiDAR when we're interested in the ground, and we can't see the ground because there's trees. If you use photogrammetry, you're going to get pretty pictures of the top of the trees. You're never going to see the ground. If you don't see the ground, you can't reconstruct the ground. With LiDAR, you can. Also, it works in the dark. It works on very soft snow, where it just looks white from a picture, but the LiDAR will have no problem getting geometry. That's a point cloud. That's what it looks like. All those echoes from the LiDAR on the ground, and then there the color is height. So it's blue on the ground, and it gets lighter when you get to the top of the trees. And you see, we also have a lot of features of the tree. And typically, we get these 4 fields out of the LiDAR, a full color point cloud. So they're it's a farm in the winter. We see the red paint on the buildings. On the right is the elevation. We see this very tall tree in the middle of the farm. The intensity of the return. So of course, some features are going to reflect most of the beam back into the sensor. Some of them are going to absorb a lot of it. Typically, leaves are not going to reflect very much because they're not going to catch the whole beam. They're only going to catch a portion. And dark objects can really capture a lot of the light and not get much return. On the right there, it's not very easy to see, but blue is the first return that comes back, and then red would be the second return that comes back. So if that beam has several echoes, we'll have several colors. We're back in Mongolia, so that's just a picture of this forest. As you can see, it looks a bit burned there in the foreground, and it's a bit fluffier in the background. And that's what the LiDAR point clouds look like. So it looks similar. We see these fluffy trees in the back and the dry trees in the front, and we have a lot of points actually in the trees. So we can see the tree trunks, we can see the tree branches, and if we're interested in the structure of that, that's really efficient. Same place in the winter, more or less. We see that the leaves have fallen. Everything is white and gray. It's a bit less pretty to look at in terms of colors, but same place. And then we can look at the snow in the forest. We can look at all kind of features of those trees. The difference between photogrammetry and LiDAR is the speed of light is really quick. Electronics is not that fast. LiDAR is often quite fuzzy. So you get on the right this kind of fuzziness. That's solar park in Fredrikstad, Sarpsborg. And on the left there, that's photogrammetry. It's much cleaner, it's much tidier, but that's over a forest. The photogrammetry is only going to give you the top of the surface if you're lucky. The LiDAR is going to give you inside of the canopy, and it's going to give you the ground, even when there's full tree coverage. That's another example. On the right, it looks very neat, it looks very sharp, it looks very dense, but there's nothing underneath the top of the canopy. Exact same place with the LiDAR. There you get an incredible amount of things. You might say, oh, but it looks all very green, including the trunks and everything. Well, the color also just comes from a camera. So it's the color of the top of the canopy is being projected also in the points that are inside of the canopy. So it doesn't look super realistic. Compared to on the right there, you see the trunks, the very few trunks we see, they are brown wood color, and they're not in the LiDAR there because the color information just comes from a camera that's on top. Yes, so LiDAR in forest, what do we get out of it? So those point clouds, the same thing that's been showing. we get what we call orthoimagery, orthomosaic, so an image that you can just overlay on a map. And then this surface height model, because we know where the ground is, and we know also the structure of the trees, we can say, oh, that's how tall all the trees are. If we cut through there, we see all those trees, we know how high the trees are. We can also then remove the trees from the model and look at the snow depth in the forest. We can use that model of where the trees are to delineate them, to count the trees. Then from their size, we can estimate some level of biomass. So in forestry, that can be interesting to know, like, how much wood is in the forest before you cut it down for firewood or construction material. So that's a very interesting thing. And then on the right there, it's a radiation model. So like we see how much energy is reaching the ground, and a very complex shading system can be implemented. And we know exactly where the light is going to be attenuated by the leaf, by the trees, by the trunks, and that's through the day. So we start in the morning, and then little by little, like I think they will 7, 8 p.m. It's going to loop back to the morning. There is the morning, 5 in the morning. And so you see the sun going around and illuminating different parts of the forest that have open areas or closed areas. Yes, the next thing we have are thermal cameras. Only the ones on the side, actually, from DJI. There's a new player there, makes sense. The idea there is that we might be interested in the temperature of things. Mostly, thermal cameras are used in the construction industry and in the inspection industry when we're trying to find leaks in buildings, water leaks, places where insulation needs to be replaced. The police might be looking for illegal plantation in your attic, stuff like that with thermal cameras. They can also be used in search and rescue when trying to find people that are lost in the forest or something like this. It's a very efficient tool. For us, we might be interested in where heat is, what heats up, what kind of effect it has on different features. So there we can see trees are hot, and also it would appear that in the open terrain here, the snow is colder, the surface is colder than inside of the forest, because the forest kind of shields the wind and keeps a warmer environment. That's an orthophoto. So that's just a picture. That's what it would look like if you were from a plane looking down on this patch of snow. It looks like there's something happening there. It's kind of a bit different feature, but not quite clear what's up. And then you get to the thermal. And this kind of not quite sure what's up, it becomes extremely clear. So the temperature range on the right there, we go from minus 33, it was minus 30 outside. It's Mongolia, winter, bad day. But the yellow there, that's warm, that's actually positive temperature. So what we're seeing here is that there's a water source there, and there's some liquid water flowing, which you might not guess there. So suddenly there's some features that are obstructed from us become really obvious. That's a patch of forest from the top from a thermal camera, and the same thing. We see the shadows are really cold, where there's a bit of sun, it's a bit warmer, and the trees themselves have quite a lot of energy. Here's a bit more like search and rescue type activity. On the left there, we have this small drone, seen from a drone. This person, like there's 3 people there, some equipment, and a tree. So we can really see, like, if it's cold outside, us humans are still going to emit quite a lot of heat. So that's quite easy to see. And on the right there, it's some kind of deer or roe deer, or I'm not exactly sure what type, but at least if we're looking for animals in the forest, we can see them with that. I looked at the normal picture, the color picture, no chance. It's dark trees. You couldn't see it. There, it shows up rather clearly in the image. And the last, no, not the last actually, one more type of sensor we have are multispectral cameras. So it's maybe a bit less easy to explain, but typical images, they have 3 channels. They see in blue, in red, and in green. And from that, they reconstruct what us humans can see. But there's much more data to be seen if you look at specific reds and specific types of green, and then you can compare the different colors to each other to try to identify objects, to try to identify minerals, different kinds of trees, different kinds of vegetation, all kind of things that you can do if you look a bit tighter into the spectral range. So that's an example of, well, there's both thermal and multispectral data. That's an elevation model. So like we fly these multispectral systems, and we do some photogrammetry, and then we get an elevation model. And then we see rather clearly around here, there's like this river channel. There's this like slightly hilly feature. That's a pingo, and there's like a mountainside. So like we get quite a lot of information from the elevation model. That's the NDVI. NDVI, it's a vegetation index. It tells you how much chlorophyll there's visible on the ground. And very green there, that's, yeah, there's some kind of vegetation, probably some kind of moss. That's in Svalbard. So not tree or grass, but some kind of vegetation there very clearly. And then not very much here. And then you have these very black areas a bit here, along the river. Black, well, very dark red at least. That means very, very little vegetation. And that's water. So water really shows as this very dark signal in that index. And they just all look like, oh, that's water, that's water, that's water. But if you look in the thermal, that's water, but it's warm water. Purple would be dark, and yellow would be hot. Those warm water, but like this one is cold water. This kind of stream here is cold water. Why do we have hot and cold water? It's in Svalbard, it's the same place. They're not particularly sheltered from wind or anything, just like there's some hot and cold water. That tells us there's something to investigate. Not exactly what it is, but something to investigate. Which brings me to the last type of sensors I'm going to talk about, is gas analyzers. This guy is a bit lonely on its slide. But basically, it's a box. It's going to breathe the air and try to compute how much methane and ethane, or, well, it could be different kind of gases, are in the air. Why is it relevant here? Well, it could be relevant if you look at camels. It's very single there. Oh, all the camels. So that's actually not our drone, but it is our sensor in Kenya last February, something like that. And we were interested in how much methane are emitted by camels. There's a number of studies on some other animals, but camels, and in Africa, apparently, that was a first. And preliminary data shows us that if the wind goes there and you have all your camels in the pit, there's high concentration of methane downwind. We maybe could have guessed, but being able to like visualize it, being able to really have numbers on it is really important. And then we're back to our pingos here. And we also want to know, maybe it's some kind of gas emanation. There's something happening below the water that heats it up. And maybe if it's some gas happening, then it would also then bubble to the surface. If you actually stand by those small lakes or ponds, they bubble. There's like blop, blop every now and then. So let's measure it. So we could use the same instrument, and actually we also did. I don't have a figure for it. That's rather recent field campaign. But we also have this thing that looks a bit like a gun there. It's a big laser, and we shoot it at those mirrors that we mounted on the drone. So like the small red box there, that's the small picture there, that's a drone. So we shoot this laser to the drone, and we can measure how much methane is in the beam, so in the whole like line. And if we do that often enough, if we do it from different places, we can reconstruct a methane measurement over the area. So I sadly don't have results for this yet to see, but it's exciting and it looks so cool. Look at those mirrors. Yes. Last thing, we have been working on swarm development because I was saying in my very third slide, that weather stations are punctual measurements. And there's some things like gas analyzer, it's really hard to get. Like you can't get that from a picture, you can't really get a very multidimensional measurement of it. So if we fly a bunch of drones at the same time that all have this mini weather station in them that measures humidity and gas concentration, then we can recreate the 3D view of where gas are coming from, how the air is mixing, how fluxes are happening. So the more drones in the air at the same time, the more dense you can get data. And then you can also like start to have some intelligence in the swarm where features are being identified and the drones concentrate on areas where there's more information. For instance, when I was back in the camels here, we would not be super interested in what's happening on the left and on the right, but we might be much more interested in the areas where there's data. So like the drones would concentrate on this to get a better image of where there's interesting things to see. So that's this swarm intelligence. That's in development, but that's very exciting stuff. Oh, I thought I deleted that slide. I didn't. That's what it was supposed to explain. Yes. So, to recap my whole blabbering, why do we use drones in geosciences? They're just more flexible for what we want to do. They allow us to see more details. We can capture more types of data, and mostly there's more options. We can really decide what we want to get, when we want to get it, how we want to get it, and the world is our oyster. We can really decide how data is acquired. There's a limit on the scale of what we can get. If the field site is more than a few square kilometers, it gets really complicated. But it really fits a gap in the knowledge and really gives us a lot of freedom. And they are relatively cheap in terms of scientific instruments, which, of course, is very attractive to our funders. Thank you very much for everyone who gave me pictures and slides and data and things to show you guys today. The list is endless. The DroneLab has been very successful. We have collaborations with people from different departments at the faculty, and also a bunch of external people that every now and then come and rent our equipment and ask us for expertise. So thank you for everyone who does that. And if you haven't yet, get in touch, and we can probably get some projects going. Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks, Luc, for this nice talk. Are there questions? One.
There is. Yeah, thank you for a very nice update on the facilities of the department. Very well illustrated too. I have one question about the multispectral scanner system. Is there any efforts to calibrate between the thematic mappers of the Landsat systems and your data? And I'm aware, of course, that the pixel dimensions are dramatically different, but still, a kind of a find for calibrating these systems will be really useful.
Yes, I should have left that slide in. Yeah, I'm going to go back a bit. Where was I? These guys. The one on the left there, it's a multispectral system that has 10 bands, and they match relatively well with Landsat and Sentinel-2. And of course, one of the use of this is to train machine learning algorithms to enhance the resolution of Landsat or Sentinel data, because they're comparable enough that we can say, hey, okay, with this we get 5, 10, 20 centimeters with pixels, and then from the 10 meter from Landsat and Sentinel, then we can get a good idea of for spatial and mixing, for really calibrating one against the other and trying to see that. We have some projects working on pollutants on snow, both sprayed algae and dust that come into snow, and of course, like on a Landsat pixel, like you see, like okay, like the snow is a bit less reflective. If you get a 10 centimeter pixel, then you're able to see what the signals are coming from, and then potentially reconstruct algorithms to understand the Landsat or the Sentinel pixel better. So that's absolutely something we're doing, and that's being developed more and more.
Other questions? There's one in the back.
Thank you, Luc. Very nice. I was wondering, what's the experience so far in using either multispectral or LiDAR to recognize different lithology or different mineralogy in rocks?
Good question. We haven't really gotten into that very much, mostly because we haven't been approached by people who would be interested in this. My understanding is that lithology, even with 10 bands, we're not going to get super much out of it. I would love to be proven wrong. We don't have hyperspectral, so hyperspectral would be hundreds of bands instead of just 5 or 10. And that would really be the right tool for this question. Hopefully we can get something going. We can find some students that would be interested in looking at that with the equipment we have and with the equipment that we could potentially acquire. I have a master's student who's looking at detecting plastics on beaches with that equipment, trying to see if there's a different signature. So, well, that's not really lithology, but it's you know, the Anthropocene, I guess. Yes, so I don't have a package answer for you there, but I think it's possible to get some things out. There's been some work in lithology using Aster satellites, and that's not much more bands, actually, it's less bands. So there's hope, and I would be excited to collaborate with lithologists.
Okay, anything else? One more question. How does it work with this DroneLab? You mentioned all these nice gadgets. How could someone at UiO use this? Is it just writing you an email and getting in touch?
I mean, that's a great first step. The whole idea is that we have this equipment that we purchased by asking people what they thought would be useful, and then we're renting it out. The rule of thumb is that we rent it for a day of use for about 1% of the purchase price. So that's how much we charge from a financial perspective. And of course, depending on the size of the drone and the complexity of the system, we will require more or less training, and of course require you to have the certificates are necessary and more or less paperwork involved. But yeah, so we do training to new users and to users that want a refresh or extension of their knowledge, and we rent the equipment. And I mean, nothing makes me more sad than having a box with a very fancy piece of equipment on a shelf gathering dust. So the more people use our stuff, the more excited I am.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining GeoOnsdag today. I think there will be a new one next month. I think Bernd will probably announce it. Yeah, and thanks again, Luc, for this interesting talk.
Thank you.